and welcome to AV Reacts, the podcast where we take a group of experts and try to talk about the things going on in pop culture and in the world right now, and we do all of that from an AV perspective. I'm your host, Leon Prather, and joining me today are two guests that I'm very excited to talk about. They're two humans that I actually like very, very much, so these are not strangers to me and hopefully aren't strangers to you as well, and they certainly won't be by the time we're done with this episode. We've got, I was going to just use your normal name and then give the nickname, but I'm going to change that. I'm just going to give the nickname now, and hopefully at some point we'll put a crawl or something up that actually says your real name. But joining me over here in this corner, first to my right, is actually someone that a lot of people in the industry probably have seen before, or seen her face, or maybe just heard her voice, because she is the award-winning podcast host of the Brave Space podcast for HETMA, and she's also one of, I think it was Commercial Integrators 40 Under 40? Yeah? We call her the Duchess of DEI. And that is Britt Yenser. Britt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for inviting me to be here.
No problem, no problem. Britt has asked that I make sure to tell her all the other names I thought of giving her, and I will do that. None of them were as cool as Duchess of DEI, but
I do love that.
I like that, actually. Now I'm going to move on down to our next guest. This person is actually someone that's been part of the team that I work on for a very long time. She's actually one of the first people that introduced me to InfoComm here, which is where we're recording today, which is kind of nice. She is one of the most subscribed authors on the AVIXA exchange, who writes about all the innovations and topics going on in the industry today, in the pro AV industry. And she's also, spoiler alert, a little bit of a VR wunderkind, and that is Iulia Popescu. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you for agreeing. I always tell the panelists that the word no is always a thing. You can always use it. And so thank you for saying yes when we asked for you to come on the show today. But today we're talking about a topic that is pretty much front of mind, I think, for a lot of people because of a lot of mainstream things going on, a lot of mainstream products that have come out, but it's something that's been around for a little bit, and that's actually the topic of VR and AR, so augmented reality and virtual reality. And I've got these panelists here today because I think they have an interesting perspective on it. Now, none of us are super experts on AR and VR. Well, one of us might be. She actually did a graduate thesis on that. That would be the VR wunderkind over here. But we do have a perspective on the topic. And so we're going to talk about that from the places that we come from. And so I mentioned, Britt, you work in higher education. There's kind of a more, I would say, traditional AV sort of environment, I think, what a lot of people that work in AV or know about AV would normally think about. But then we've also got Iulia, who is worked with sort of the more emotional evoking kind of products and projects. So we'll actually make sure that when this goes out, we can actually share some of the stuff that you've done visually there. But I don't want to ask, hey, let's define it and get really technical in it. We will define it a little bit just in case you've for some reason never heard of these things, potentially been living under a rock for a while and don't know what these things are. But we're going to ask some questions kind of from the perspective of where you work and the things that you do professionally or personally, and kind of get your thoughts on this technology or these two technologies that are very much front of mind right now and probably going to continue to be so for a while. So let's actually start by looking at the concept of AR and VR. Before we get into a lot of reactions here, we're going to move into a topic, or I'll call this segment the who we are. We did that. Now what's VR and AR? Not the best segment name. I've done better. It was hard. Don't judge. I called my mom. She said it was okay. So I feel pretty good about it. Let's actually talk about what those two things are. So in your own words, didn't ask you to prepare a definition for these two. I'd actually say, let's actually start with Iulia. How would you define for our audience what virtual reality really is from your perspective?
So from my perspective, virtual reality is essentially a simulated 3D environment that you can basically kind of step into using the virtual reality headsets that they have available. So that's how I would define it.
Sure. And I think it's interesting because sometimes we just see headsets and we go, what's going on within that? So I think it's nice to hear someone say what's going on and actually use words and not just something that you would experience to kind of define. And then I'll actually come over to you, Britt. How would you define augmented reality from your perspective?
Sure. So from my perspective, I would define augmented reality as the use of technology to overlay an experience over the real world.
Yeah. So between these two, if you're not incredibly familiar with these concepts, although you likely are, one of the things that kind of separates these two is one of the things that unites these two things is there are digital elements being added into your field of vision. But on one hand, you've got a highly immersive kind of application of some of the same things. And then on the other end, it's a little less immersive and more enveloping or, well, augmenting the world in front of you, or at least that's sort of the pitch. I actually really love that augmented reality has the title augmented reality. If this were a war, like a popularity war, I feel like one of them has a cooler name. Virtual reality doesn't sound as cool as augmented reality, in my personal opinion. But I'd love to also ask you guys, or you women, how you actually, you women sounds weird. I'd love to ask you people, that sounds weird too. I'd love to ask our two panelists. I'd love to ask our two panelists, how are you using either one of these technologies today in your personal or professional lives? And I'll start with Britt.
Oh, sure. So I am not personally using it, but my institution is, so I can speak to that. So I am at Northampton Community College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and part of our IT team is working on creating a virtual reality space for our students. There are a couple of them, but the one that they're working on right now that I think is really exciting is a virtual space where students can explore a zoo environment, and they can go kind of into that space to create ways to create enrichment activities for zoo animals.
Okay.
And I just love that so much, because if we consider best pedagogical practices and we look at Bloom's taxonomy, for example, the highest level of achievement in learning is the ability to create. And so we are inviting students to create an enrichment activity for these animals. So it's really like the highest level of engagement and learning. And like, you can't take every student to the zoo, right? But you can take every student and put them in this virtual space.
That's way cooler than anything that was offered when I was a college student. So I think what school again? I think I can always go back. No.
It's Northampton Community College, and we would love to have you there.
I took a field trip to a swamp. Yeah, no kidding.
Okay.
Someone thought that was a great place to send students, was a swamp. Where there were alligators, by the way, in the water, and it was not the best trip. But I would have loved to go to a virtual swamp. Smells better, I think. And virtual alligators, I'm sure, are more fun than regular alligators or augmented reality alligators. I don't know. I don't know what the right term is here. But Iulia, how are you using VR or AR today?
Yeah, so a lot of what I've worked on and what I'm interested in is kind of retelling folktales using VR. And I just think that it's a great way to kind of garner this fresh, new excitement for culture, for different languages, for the arts. And so I think that virtual reality and augmented reality really has this great potential to really assist with informal learning. So that's a lot of what my personal projects have kind of been involved with, and that's what I enjoy doing with virtual reality.
So for our listeners or viewers, because we do audio and we do video for this podcast, one of the things that I hope you end up taking away from this particular episode as we continue talking is that while these are two technologies that you do see use cases for, oftentimes in mainstream media or advertisements, there are still things that we could be doing with these technologies that we haven't thought of. I today just found out that someone has thought of making some kind of zoo simulation, and I would have never thought that would have been a thing ever. It didn't even dawn in my, it wasn't there. Then we were also talking about this kind of, what I feel like is sort of a emotionally evocative kind of application that Iulia is talking about, where you're taking stories that an entire culture maybe knows and kind of retelling them in another way. And that, I think, is really, really appealing, but also very interesting to think about the fact that every piece of technology that we ever talk about, ever create, ever interact with is just waiting for one more different application. You know, they're not a one size fits all kind of a thing. It's not a cookie cutter thing. They're just tools, and we can use them for lots of things. And something that's interesting to me is how it's been used over time. And why do I say over time? Because we're going to have a little game. We're going to have a trivia game where just like the show Whose Line Is It Anyway, the questions are kind of made up and the points really don't matter. But you are able to get some bragging rights, I guess, to say that you're the AV Reacts champion. There's no trophy because the award it's so prestigious that there just isn't a trophy that really captures the magnitude of the accomplishment. Also, I didn't ask the video team for a budget for trophies. But we're going to go ahead and have a quick 3-question, maybe, quiz, test, competition, whatever we'll call it. And this is going to be about the history of AR and VR. Now, our panelists did not know that this was going to happen. They knew I'd ask some questions. They are not prepared for this. So I promise if they get these things right, well, first off, I'm going to be impressed because I may have some difficult questions. If they get them wrong, don't feel bad or don't be mad at them. It's more my fault than theirs. So let's go ahead and we'll just imagine some Whose Line Is It Anyway lights. I don't think we have that. Maybe some Whose Line Is It Anyway music. I can just do that with my mouth. All right, so the first question, and I'm going to throw to you, and I'll give each of you an opportunity to answer a question, and we'll see kind of what happens after that. The first question, we actually have an image of this one as well. If our production team can bring up image number 1, I will describe what you're seeing here. The first functional head-mounted augmented reality system was developed by Ivan Sutherland, who was also in higher education, Harvard, in fact. So I'm going to throw this question to Britt. Which of these was not a name given to that device that you can see there on the monitor? Was it, or which of these was not a name? Was it the Sword of Damocles, the Beard of Neptune, the stereoscopic television apparatus for individual use, or the head-mounted display? So it's actually got multiple names, and I'll say those one more time. The Sword of Damocles, the Beard of Neptune, the stereoscopic television apparatus for individual use, or the head-mounted display. Which of these was not a name given to that device?
Okay, so higher ed loves to make weird, obscure references, so I'm going to go with the last one because it seems the most boring.
Okay. It is the most boring, and unfortunately, that's a goose egg.
Oh.
That actually was one of the names. Now, in truth, I'm going to give you half a point because that name did not come from the higher ed folks who came up with it. That was a name that was kind of given to it, but that was one of the names.
Okay.
The Sword of Damocles is actually the name that most people use. And why was it called the Sword of Damocles? Well, it was just heavy. So if you know anything about the Sword of Damocles, it was a very, very heavy apparatus. You can see in that monitor there, it doesn't look like it was intended for form and function or even fashion or comfort. And so it actually had to be suspended, as you can see in this image here. So for those that can't see these images, I'll describe it. Imagine that you're at the eye doctor and they put that thing in front of your face where they're like, do you like a better 1 or number 2? And so imagine that, but now it weighs like 50 pounds. And they're not putting it in front of your face, they're just putting it on your head, and now your neck is really tired. So it had to be suspended from the ceiling, and you had to securely fasten somebody to it. And fun fact, the very first image that was displayed on it was actually just a cube, just so you know. Let's move on to question number 2. So right now, Britt, you are the leader on the board. Iulia, no pressure, but you're currently losing. Question number 2. The world is waiting to see just how much our world is going to change as a result of advances in mixed reality technology. Which of these has the broadest potential implications, positive or negative, for our world? And which of these does not involve concepts of mixed realities? In fact, let's rewind that. I'm only going to ask that last question. Which of these things does not involve concepts of mixed realities? Is it A, the multiverse, B, the metaverse, C, the Snyderverse, or D, the Matrix?
Snyderverse?
All right. That is actually correct. So, Iulia, you also get half a point, only because I wanted to be fair. Let's go ahead and have a tiebreaker because I wanted this to be interesting. This is going to be a sudden death match. Who's going to win? I don't know. Here's the tiebreaker question. You both will answer. Your answers will be judged. We have a little bit of an audience here. They might want to help with the judging. Question number 3, the tiebreaker. Are we living in a simulation right now? Iulia.
Yes, very much so.
Just that's it. Just mic drop. Done. Yes. Just yes. Okay. Okay.
Have you ever seen The Matrix?
I've seen it. I might be in it. I don't know. Britt, how about you? Are we living in a simulation right now?
Yes.
Just mic drop answers.
No, I mean, what else is there? Yes.
All right. Well, audience, this is going to be a real nail biter decision here. You have so much to consider. Who wins? Is it Britt or is it Iulia? Yeah, and the points don't matter. You both win. I just appreciate that you played the game. And now everybody at home knows a little bit more about AR and VR than they really wanted to. But let's move on to our second segment here, and that's going to be kind of continuing the theme about simulations. We're going to call this, Are We Living in a Simulation Right Now? Again, not the best segment title, but I don't have a writer. So I'm going to ask you guys some questions related to how we look at the technology today. And one of the things that I think is really an interesting question to answer that I don't personally have an answer for is, why do you think the advancements in AR and VR are so notable today, considering that the technology, as we just showed, has been around for a while? What is it that makes it something that people want to talk about today? What do you think draws people to these two topics or to these technologies today? Either of you.
So I think that there are just a lot of unique aspects about augmented reality and virtual reality. I think one thing that makes augmented reality so unique is that it's just honestly really easy to kind of use. A lot of times you have augmented reality apps just on your phone, and so many people have phones, so that just makes it something that's really easy for people to use. So I think that's what really draws a lot of people to AR. And then when it comes to virtual reality, I think that there are so many, new headsets, new exciting technologies that are coming out. And so I think that garners a lot of excitement for it. Additionally, I think one of the most interesting and unique aspects of VR essentially is kind of like the framelessness of that medium. So essentially when, you're playing a computer game or when you're looking at something on your phone, you always see that frame, that border. So there's a little bit of that distance from being that full embodiment, that full immersion. But I think what's really interesting and has so much potential within VR is that you don't have that frame. You can look up, down, left, right, sideways, and you'll still see that environment. So I think that a lot of people are really attracted to some of these unique features that these technologies offer.
I totally agree. I think that is what makes it so cool, is that it's truly an immersive experience. And for higher education, one of our goals is to always lower the barrier to entry, right? So like I was saying before, we can't take every kiddo to the zoo, not to call them kiddos, they're adults, but we can't take every student to the zoo, but we can create this space where more and more students have the opportunity to have that experience and have that learning experience.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so great for informal learning and things like that, because, maybe some of these kids or some of these people have never gotten a chance to play around with virtual reality, with augmented reality. So I think that creates a lot of excitement and a lot of opportunity for additional learning. So I think it's a wonderful tool.
Why do you think the layman, the non-geek, right, the non-tech geek, didn't really have AR or VR in their minds until the last couple of years? We see, I see people that don't play video games, right? Video games are one of the things that a lot of people use VR for example, who are now talking about virtual reality. They're talking about products that they see. They're wondering about buying things and whether it's useful for them. Why do we think now let's rewind to maybe the late 80s, early 90s. I remember the Virtual Boy. It was a game. It was made by Nintendo. It wasn't amazing by any standards today, but I remember going, this is amazing. But then I stared at it for a little while and I got a headache and I was like, this is no longer amazing. And I kind of forgot about it. I thought virtual reality was just a term that people used. It was something to come in the future or something that just wasn't really for me. But now it seems like people are finding reasons to think that it's for them. Any thoughts on why that might be?
Yeah, well, to the point about that image that you showed earlier, like the technology is no longer cumbersome or difficult to use. So the more comfortable it seems to be, it's that, limit the barrier to entry. If it feels like something that I can use and be comfortable with, then that is going to make me want to engage with it more.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of excitement around these tools right now with all of the new headsets that have been released throughout the years. It's definitely a lot less bulkier. There's so many improvements being made. So I think it's really drawing a lot of attention to these technologies and what can be done with them.
Yeah. I'm going to harken back to something that you said, Iulia, that I think is really just kind of a really great thing to point out about all sorts of technology. When you mentioned the idea that in Britt's zoo example, you potentially are giving experiences to people that didn't have those before. And there's something, I'll get a little bit serious. I'm not usually serious on this show, but there's something that's actually kind of beautiful about this idea that you've got technology that's now got a lower barrier to entry, generally speaking, unless you're, the $3,500 headset that everyone's talking about right now. Unless that's the one you're talking about, it's a little bit more cost effective to get into either AR or VR. We're carrying around phones, generally speaking, that are able to accomplish some of these things right now. So that barrier to entry on the technology is there, but now we're using the technology potentially to reduce the barrier to entry to an entire experience as well. That's something that can be enriching in lives, and I think that's actually pretty cool. So if there are people out there who are listening to this podcast and making virtual reality applications and augmented reality applications, and you're focused on little things like, Snapchat filters and things like that, I'll just throw out there that there's other things you can do as well. Those are cool. Those are cool. But they're more probably impactful uses that I'm really interested in seeing more and more of in the future. I'm going to go to our second or final question for this particular segment, and that's about the importance. Virtual reality and augmented reality, I would say that they both are somewhat immersive. Augmented reality is not closing you off to the world around you, but in some ways you could say it immerses you in the information that it's overlaying. It's creating a more engaging, potentially, experience. When I see technology, I oftentimes think about the why behind the tech. And if immersion, which is the main word I always hear people say, I see it in the advertisements, I hear people saying it all the time, immersion, we're making immersive experiences. I have to ask the question that I've never heard anyone else ask: why is it so important for us to immerse into something we're consuming? Why do you think that's something that we just want to do? What makes that so appealing?
So I can talk to that a little bit from my perspective as well. I think what makes it really, especially from my perspective, what makes it really interesting is that when you have something that you're totally immersed in, and when you have something that you feel this embodiment with, I think that creates this opportunity to also almost place yourself in somebody else's shoes, or place yourself in a location that you've never been to before, almost immersing yourself in a new culture or new spot. And so I think that this really opens up a lot of opportunities just to, one, experience something different and maybe feel a sense of empathy. I think one of the most important things about what's memorable about stories is that they made you feel something. So when you're in this really immersed environment and you feel this embodiment and you're able to almost put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and it can lead to, more feelings of empathy toward other people, toward other cultures, toward things like that. And so I think that's why it's, really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. One thing that I thought of, there's a phrase in education that I'm going to butcher, but it's essentially, if you tell me, I'm going to forget, but if you involve me, I'm going to understand.
Yeah.
And so if we create an immersive experience, it can create an emotional response in that student. They will feel involved, and that is where really good core learning happens.
Yeah. So coming from my world, I've always done things where communication is a big, important thing. And also coming from sort of the storytelling world, I'd say as well, we have a saying that's similar to that, where it's 90% of the time people are going to forget what you say, but 100% of the time they're always going to remember how you made them feel. That never leaves. Emotion and all of that is so strong. One of the things that I hear in your answers is that immersion isn't really the end. Immersion isn't the why. It sounds like immersion is a means to an end. So what we're trying to accomplish sometimes needs immersion, and now we can do it in a slightly more approachable way than before. There are plenty of other ways to feel immersed. Actually, a member of our production crew and I were filming something off-site at a museum, and there was a very large technologically based exhibit where a lot of images were projected around us, and that was really immersive. That is also not cheap, and that is not something that everyone can experience unless they're there physically. And so the idea of bringing that home is really cool. But I appreciate you answering that question, because I've been wondering it for a while and haven't asked it out loud, and now I have asked it, and I feel like I have an answer. So I can now move on to the next question in my life. What will that be, I wonder? I'm sure it'll be the topic of our next episode. Let's actually move on to our final segment. And truth be told, I don't know. Oh, look, there is a timer. I was going to say, I don't know how much time is left. I hope, is that accurate? Sure, it's accurate? Cool. All right. I'm getting a thumbs up from our production team. At some point, we need to turn a camera on you guys, because you guys are beautiful people. You're not only beautiful people, but sometimes you're some of the most entertaining parts of the show. If I mess up and Noreen type something to me in the chat about something, that's always funny, and you never get to see that. But let's move on to this last segment. We're going to look future now. We're going to look ahead. So I'm going to call this segment "What's on the Horizon, World?" No one laughed, no one clapped. Yeah, no one knows. Yeah, thank you. Someone did from the background. I appreciate that. I'm sure the people at home are also getting out of their seats right now. Just can't take how awesome that was. Carrie, please, can you have someone else come up with the segment names in the future, because I'm really bad at it. But we're going to talk about the future of this technology. We'll talk about what we think is on the horizon, really. In Horizon World, that was the first metaverse application. Anyone? No, it's fine. Doesn't matter. So I'm actually going to quote someone else who was on this show recently. It was actually Paula Lampkins, who's actually from the AVIXA team. She's a motion graphics animator, and we were talking about the topic of AI and content creation. And she uses AI in pre-production. So that was sort of the crux of that episode. And she said something about AI that I thought was really, really impactful. And we're not talking about AI in this episode, but I'm curious about what she said and how you might relate that to AR and VR. And she said something to the effect of, it's interesting to talk about AI right now because we are still building something while we're still learning how to use the thing that we're building. It's not completely built yet. The end isn't really there, and the end isn't really in sight. Do you feel like that's true of AR? And do you feel like that's true of VR? Is one of those things something that seems a little bit more viable in the future, or do we think one has maybe peaked? What are your thoughts?
That's a great question, and you're going to give a way better answer to this because you're the actual expert. I'm just along for the ride. But I think if I think in terms of what is my personal experience with any technology, I think that we're always moving forward and always growing. Growing in terms of capability and in terms of being able to open it up to more consumers. But I would be interested to see what it starts to look like in the future, because the tech itself tends to get smaller and smaller. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
those are my thoughts.
Don't feel bad about not being an expert. I'm also on this side. I'm not named the VR Wunderkind. So we always need a control. It's like I think that the Olympics should actually have a control. I could be the track and field control, the normal guy that's on his couch eating potato chips while the athletes are running. So you can really get a sense or appreciation of the athletic prowess. We always have a control. So there's a good reason that we're here. But Iulia, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I definitely agree. I feel like there is always so much growth, especially with technology. And so we are definitely going to continue seeing a lot of these new things pop up for both AR and VR. I mean, we're already seeing, so many different applications that have started using AR, and, who knows what the future might be. And then especially with virtual reality itself, there's so many, different headsets that are continuously coming out, and just so many different avenues for creativity that has been kind of inspired by all of these new things that are continuously coming out. So I think it's just really exciting.
Sure. I'm going to ask both of you, I'll start with Britt and then go to Iulia. What's something that you would like to see AR and VR involved in, or what's an application that you'd like to see that doesn't exist yet? What's something you'd love to see in the future on the horizon?
I would just love to see it be more accessible, because right now we are looking at price points that are not accessible to most people yet, or even to most institutions of higher learning yet. So if we can get to a point where it feels like something we can truly invest in, and that it could work with our refresh cycles that tend to be as long as 5 to 7 years, I would love to see that.
How about you, Iulia?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that one of the biggest aspects of it right now, especially with all the new things coming out, is that it is expensive. It is very pricey. So with all the new things coming out, obviously everybody wants all the latest tech, but not everybody is able to get their hands on it and work on, virtual reality projects. And I think, that can kind of be a barrier because so many people might have this creativity, these ideas, but they're not able to kind of put it in place due to these constraints. So I am excited for that, and I do hope that's something that happens in the future, is that they take that into consideration.
I would like to see the application, the hardware, come down in price for sure, but I'm definitely eager for the coming down in weight,
Yes.
Being a little bit more practical, that you could power it for as long as you would want to. I think it's strange in my mind thinking about wearing a headset for 8 hours a day, for work or something. But at the same time, I'm also only dealing with what exists right now, and that is heavy things that don't last that long. So you tethering yourself to a wall, which just reminds me of a post-apocalyptic kind of future. It just doesn't. That's not the look that we all want. That's not the thing that excites us. So I'd love to see. I don't know the character's name. The guy in Star Trek. LeVar Burton plays him, the host of Reading Rainbow. He had the sort of visor. I don't really know what was going on with that visor. And every futuristic kind of cyberpunk show, movie, whatever, always has someone that has that visor where you can't see their eyeballs. I don't know if it's sunglasses or what, but something that's a smaller form factor than that. I'd rather see your eyes.
Yes.
But at the same time, I'd love to see something that is smaller in the future. So
yeah, I would love for something to be less bulkier too, because when I was doing a lot of research and we had a lot of different people, and some of the bigger headsets, or like the bulkier ones, they didn't fit properly on people's heads. So that was another thing. That's a good point too. It was the headset was either too big or too small for some people. So I think, having something that's a little bit easier, more like glasses or something like that, might make it more accessible too.
Yeah, for sure. So thinking about all these musings of the future and different things that we've seen, like that Star Trek character, I don't remember his name. Someone write in the comments or whatever, let me know what that guy's name is, because I don't know. I was going to say Data. That's wrong. That's the robot. I feel really bad. There's someone, Geordi? The voice of God, so to speak, I think just let me know that the character's name is Geordi. Anyway, let's move on to some more pop culture references as we kind of take things here to a close. Let's have a little bit of fun. On AV Reacts, we have a segment that we often call Around the Interwebs. And so what I've asked our guests to do is provide some memes that are kind of like their ideal meme about AR and VR. We like the technology. We're not trying to dog it or anything, but at the same time, it's kind of funny to think about some of these things. And so I'm actually going to share mine, which you can sort of see on the monitor there, and I'll describe it for people at home. There is a news clipping that I found that says that Moscow farmers are fitting cows with VR headsets to improve their mood and boost milk production. And there's a picture of a cow who is wearing what looks like an Oculus headset. I'm sure the cow does not know what's going on, and the cow did not think that was how the cow was going to start that day. But then beneath that, we've got a throw to the Matrix, which we've already talked about a few times. Is that foreshadowing at all about this technology that everyone thinks of the Matrix when we think about it? But it's the scene where Neo is coming out of his, I guess, birthing pod, essentially, and he looks across the way and sees a bunch of other humans in birthing pods, and the line says, "And so it begins." We are putting headsets on cows. It's not... It's a meme, but it's like a legit thing. That to me represents the future I don't necessarily want to see, because it kind of takes me to our next one about a horse, if we have that image as well. You've got Morpheus in that famous line, "You think that's a something, you're something." There's a horse that's grazing on hay with two, not blinders, but two virtual reality headsets, and he's looking at the horse saying, "You think that's a pasture you're grazing?" Which would frighten me if someone were ever to tell me, "Oh, you think that's chicken you're eating?" Oh, that's scary. But we've got a couple other examples. Let's throw to, I think it's Iulia's? No, this is Britt's, actually. Britt, can you describe this meme for our audience and why you love this?
Yes. So it has some text. It says, in 1997, we said, "Don't sit too close to the TV. It will damage your eyes." And then it cuts to 2017, and there's a person wearing a, headset over their eyes. I don't know that 2017 is like the correct, year for the technology, but same basic concept. I just love that in terms of, what our moms told us to do in terms of taking care of ourselves.
Yep.
And we were like, I'm going to choose my own adventure, Mom.
Yeah. Yeah. I was also told that story, that I don't know if it's a lie or the truth, but I didn't do it. And now I question the idea of putting on a headset because I'm literally putting the TV next to my eyeballs. I'm sure someone's thought of that, because all these designers have moms, and all the moms probably told them the same thing. But that cracked me up a ton, Britt. I love that so much. Iulia, I think you actually gave us a few different ones. Let's see what we get first.
Oh, okay.
And you'll have to explain this one a little bit. This is a character that I don't actually recognize, but I understand the meme.
So this is a character. This is Finn from Adventure Time. And so in the first panel, he says, "Whoa," with the headset on. And he says, "This VR is so realistic." And then the third panel, it's a picture of an onion that's been cut. And in the fourth panel, he starts crying.
Oh.
And so essentially, since we were talking kind of about the future of like VR and AR, I'm just curious to see, how realistic that these assets and these designs are going to look in the future, and to elicit these emotions. Like, it would be so interesting to get that experience where you see somebody like cutting an onion in VR or something, but it's so realistic that it almost kind of starts that emotional reaction within you. You're like, oh, am I actually experiencing this? So that's kind of where that came from.
So I feel dumb. I saw that meme and my mind went, "Oh, that guy just has onions in his headset." Like, it's not a virtual reality headset. It's just a guy being duped. So I feel dumb because I looked at it and was like, "Oh, that idiot."
I mean, he might
That
be getting
moron.
duped, honestly. Onions in the eyes.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. I'm going to have us throw to the last one really quickly, mostly just because my wife watches this. And she can't stand High School Musical. And so you sent us a High School Musical meme. And this is a very famous scene. I'm sure out there in the world, there are other people who find High School Musical as fascinating as I do. And there's the scene from where Troy Bolton is dancing around a golf course and having a very existential kind of crisis moment. And then you've got this line, "Is it virtual or is it reality?" And I could do a Troy Bolton impression, but it would be a bad one. But that's literally just there for my wife, who has to be mentioned in every episode. We've noticed that there's a streak. There's no episode where my wife hasn't been mentioned. We should probably have Anna on the show, because everyone knows things about her but has never actually met her. Now she's thinking, "I can't believe you told people my name. Now people are going to bother me online." Sorry. Okay, I'm not actually sorry. But I personally love that meme so much. So all this is funny. We're poking fun a bit, but in reality, even though we talk seriously about these things, it's also nice to sometimes have a little bit of levity. And I would say I'm definitely excited for where we go with this technology in the future, mostly because I think that the most interesting applications, the most useful things, probably haven't been come up with yet. And who knows? It could be one of us that comes up with it. It could be the VR Wunderkind. It could be our
you.
control. It could be our control here. That's also possible. It could be me. That's less likely, probably. Maybe it's probably one of you two. Could be someone in our audience, or could be one of our listeners at home. But either way, I thank you so much for joining us on this episode. If you want to catch any more content like this, and I'm sure that you do, you can find more of it on AVIXA.tv. That's AVIXA TV, or you could also find it on YouTube and where all podcasts are sold, essentially. We're pretty much everywhere. Just go to your neighborhood podcast hawker, and he will direct you to the AV Reacts podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you guys next time. Oh yeah, that's right. Camera and deuces.